Okay. Oh no, I don't know how to go back to the beginning. I'm gonna have to scroll through all of them. Google Slides is not amazing always. Okay. So, 我要谢谢 Kevin. Where is Kevin? Kevin left? Okay, 我要谢谢 Kevin 举办 Angular 台湾让我们一起鼓掌，谢谢他。
谢谢，谢谢。
So, without amazing community people like Kevin, I would not be here today, and we would not have a great, amazing, growing Angular community. So it's very, very awesome. I'm very excited. I'll also be at JSDC and GDG tomorrow. And 我今天要讲的题目是 The Magic of Reactive Programming with RxJS. So, 请问你们有听过 Reactive Programming 吗? Maybe? No? You? Okay. So, a lot of people have heard of reactive programming, but a lot of people haven't been able to actually practice reactive programming. It's actually not very true, though. So, 我的名字是 Tracy Lee, and 我的中文名字是李淑清。You know, 我的爸爸是高雄人 and 我的妈妈是台中人. And I am the co-founder of This.Labs, which is a consultancy. We do JavaScript consulting, which is very exciting. And we do a lot of things to help the JavaScript community grow as well. I'm also a Google developer expert for Angular and the web. I'm on the RxJS core team. So I primarily lead the documentation initiative there. And then I do community relations for the Node Foundation as well. I love JavaScript. So if it's JavaScript, I've probably played around with it or developed in it. I'm also the board member of Vue Vixens, which is awesome. I do Google Women Tech Makers, the Modern Web Podcast, if you've heard of it. And I also organize Google Developer Group Silicon Valley and Triangle. So this is only a few of the things I do for fun. So 从星期二到台湾每天就在吃好吃的饭。因为台湾的食物太好吃了 so that's amazing. And 我最喜欢的吃是最喜欢的是富航豆浆跟what is it 高记生煎包. Both are amazing. So I can say 金后家, and that's like the only Taiwanese I know. So 如果你们有地方我应该去吃的话，就 DM me on Twitter at LadyLeet. I'm very interested. So 我们回到今天重要的话题 and move on to English because I can only speak conversationally in Chinese, but I love practicing with you guys. It's been really fun. And I just learned how to do Chinese on my phone. So I've been talking to Will and Kevin and Jesseline on the phone. So back to reactive programming. So first, let's think about what actually reactive programming is. When I heard about reactive programming, I said, hey, this is interesting. I want to learn this. All my friends were doing RxJS. And I said, I want to learn this as well. So the first thing you do is you wonder, what on earth is it, right? If we look at Wikipedia, we can read through the Wikipedia definition together. And it says that reactive programming is a programming paradigm concerned with data streams and the propagation of change. This means that it becomes possible to express static or dynamic data streams with ease via the employed programming language. And that an inferred dependency within the associated execution model exists, which facilitates the automatic propagation of the change involved with data flow. So in layman's terms, what that actually means is that reactive programming is simply dealing with sets of events over time, and it's the automatic or implicit, right, not explicit propagation of change. So each step within your application doesn't know or care about the previous step. It just wants to perform an action to and react to the incoming change. So if we look at Excel, for example, you can see Excel on row 1. You have I love programming, and then D is going to concatenate A, B, and C. Again, because this is a reactive example, if you change the input of C to say reactive programming, that it implicitly concatenates everything to D. So D will just change into I love reactive programming. So this is the most basic way to understand what reactive programming actually is. We're going to talk about a few things today. We'll talk about reactive programming in standards, reactive programming in different frameworks and libraries, how to actually think reactively. This is something that is very difficult to do if you haven't been doing it for a while. What RxJS is as well, and then how reactive programming actually can make your life a lot easier if you choose to adopt it. So we'll talk about reactive programming in standards first. If you look at the past few years, we've started to see a lot of different standard bodies like WHATWG and TC39 begin to sort of consider and adopt and talk about these reactive programming paradigms. So if you look at TC39, we have the promises, and then we have the observable proposal. And then in WHATWG, we have the event target observable proposal as well. So if we look at promises, this was added to browsers 2014. A lot of us are very familiar with promises now. Added to Node in 2015. Added to the official ES 2015 spec. Of course, it's push-based, single value, always asynchronous, eager, stateful, has a simple base API, and really simple transformation options like then and catch. So this is reactive because it allows you to process a value asynchronously and in steps through then blocks. So here I'm just using the fetch API to fetch a JSON file. And then what I'm doing is I'm chaining together a few promises to parse a JSON file into a JavaScript object. And then I'm console logging to signal that I've actually completed the parsing and that I have fruit snacks. So a lot of people don't realize that promises are actually reactive. And the reason is because most of the code that you write to interact with promises is not. But this in itself is reactive. If we look at observable as well, so this is TC39 proposal stage 1. It's been there for a while. One of the reasons why it's sort of been stalled out a little bit is because the folks that were championing this in TC39 have actually left. So Jafar Hussain, who sat on TC39 at Netflix, has left to, I believe, I think he joined Netflix very recently. So, you know, with TC39, you always need a champion. And unfortunately, we don't have as strong of one right now. And there's a lot of conversations that still need to happen to help people understand why this is important to our language. But RxJS is actually a reference implementation of this observable proposal. Has a simple base API. It's push-based, multiple values. It can be synchronous or asynchronous, which is super awesome. Generally, it's stateless, lazy as well, which is also awesome, and has many transformations out of the box via something like RxJS. So since we're all Angular people here, of course, we know we have a billion operators, or more like 60 operators. So when you look at observable, I'm using it here, and here I'm just using the Ajax utility from RxJS to get the JSON file, and then I'm going ahead and subscribing to that JSON file so that I can emit the values from that observable. So observables are, again, also lazy, so it actually doesn't request the file until you call subscribe, which is very nice, and then I'm going ahead and console logging fruit snacks, just like I did with promises. If we look at the event target observable proposal, so this was proposed about almost exactly 1 year ago by Ben Lesh on behalf of Google. You can look at the URL and check out all the conversation. Everything around observables, or this is just there's just a lot to read through. So what this would do is it would add a method called on to event target, and it would actually come with a few different operators as well, like map, filter first, and take and tell, which is super awesome. So if you use it, what you would do is just simply call the on method with an event type as the argument, and then it's going to give you back an observable of those different events. So here I'm just using a button element, calling on, and then passing in click events as the argument, and this will give me back an observable of click events. So we talked about standards a little bit, and I hope you guys all go check out the different GitHub repos and comment on why you think this is important for the community, because again, voices and giving your opinion on GitHub is very important for proposals and standards to actually move forward. If somebody cares, everybody else will care. It's great. We'll talk now about different reactive programming in different frameworks and libraries. And I'm going to walk through 4 of them today. We'll start with D3, we'll go to Angular, Vue, and React. So this is a D3 example of reactive programming in D3. So the thing I love about this code, even though I'm not a D3 expert, is that it's very declarative. So even though I don't really know what's going on because I don't use D3 every day, I can kind of figure out what it's doing, right? Like, that's really nice. And this is also one thing I love about reactive programming. It makes your code a lot easier to read. It being declarative doesn't necessarily make it reactive, but it's sort of a nice side benefit of reactive programming. So the reason it's reactive, though, is because you're reacting to, again, the propagation of change, right? And you're changing a value's location or the way it looks, but you're not doing so explicitly on every single event. You're simply going through and describing what you want to actually happen, and then it just kind of happens under the hood. So people who wrote D3, of course, weren't thinking when they did, I'm going to write reactive programming. But this is a great example of how we see reactive programming paradigms everywhere. We just don't really think like, oh, hey, this is reactive programming. It's kind of cool. Angular, of course, and RxJS are best friends. So this is very awesome, and it's very beneficial for us as a community of Angular developers to have RxJS as a first-class citizen. And of course, who uses NGRX? Anybody? Most people? 1 or 2? Or you're shy? Either way. So NGRX, of course, is an awesome benefit of using RxJS as well. So if we look at Angular again, so Angular is actually one of the most reactive-focused frameworks out there, which again I think is so awesome. And it's because RxJS is the external dependency to Angular. Ben Lesh also, who wrote RxJS, joined the Angular team recently. So even he's been working mostly on compiler stuff, but he also gets to spend some of his time working on RxJS as well. So that's very nice. And RxJS 7, I think, will go into alpha very soon. So examples of how Angular actually benefits from this. So we, of course, have the on-push change detection strategy. So when you enable this, it provides more efficient and performant data flow because it's going to push changes at you versus detect changes. And of course, we have NGRX, right? And that's just, it's so funny because it's just the Redux pattern that's re-implemented in RxJS. But it's nice that we have that. And of course, the Angular router. So you can get an observables of various events around activated routes. Example, you can get an observable of changes to route parameters or query parameters, which is awesome. And then because the forms team as well has made everything reactive and all validation events are reactive, this really allows the synchronous and asynchronous validation to blend together really nicely. And there's, of course, a ton of other really cool ways that Angular benefits from reactive programming, but these are a few. Now, if we look at React, for example, with React, if you just look at React in itself, when you actually call setState in React, it will trigger a re-render of that component and potentially its children as well. And so this might be a little bit of a stretch. And when I said this, actually, when I said React is reactive, I got a lot of Twitter direct messages saying, no, it's not. And the reason why a lot of people said, no, it's not, is because they said, well, this is pull-based, and reactive programming is push-based. And this is actually not true. So a lot of people, this is a very common misconception that reactive programming needs to actually be push-based. But again, if you look at how set state propagates change, the idea of itself technically is reactive. And then we, of course, look at Redux Observable. So this was co-authored by Ben Lesh and Jay Phelps, who were both on the RxJS core team. And this uses RxJS to declaratively handle your business logic and side effects when using Redux. And then we have MobX, of course. And of course, some people in the Angular community also use MobX. But when you use MobX with React or with Angular, it basically makes your, in this case, React full reactive programming. So with MobX, your state basically becomes one gigantic reactive model. And again, this is a great example of something being pull-based and not push-based, but also reactive. So what happens is that it'll push a notification at you, and then you need to pull the values out of it to actually calculate the value. Vue, of course, as well. So I've used RxJS and Vue without VueRx, but VueRx was written to make it more ergonomic if you're trying to use Rx with your Vue.js application. And it was just recently updated to the latest version as well, so you can check out VueRx if you're doing any Vue.js. So after I started learning about what reactive programming was, and again, I thought I was going to learn this amazing thing, and oh, it was going to be so great. But then I realized after I figured out what it was, that it's just a fancy term for everything we all do. It shows up in all different areas of our lives. And no one actually invented reactive programming, right? It's just a name for the pattern of declaratively reacting to the propagation of change. So that was a cool realization. Also kind of disappointing, because again, I thought I was going to learn something magical. But maybe my code is better. So reactive programming patterns, when you look at your code and you sort of look at reactive programming in general, it tends to appear where there's a very natural fit for events to be modeled as values over time. So most typically you'll see it with WebSockets or user events, animations, HTTP requests, network connections, file system changes, and different things like that. So we talked a little bit about reactive programming and different frameworks and libraries, but one thing that's very important when you start doing reactive programming, and probably very much so with your Angular applications, you've kind of had to do this, is this whole idea of actually thinking reactively, right? It's definitely a mind shift to start doing this. So in order to start thinking reactively, you really need to start thinking of everything being modeled as an event. And the idea that all web applications are actually event-driven. So that means that everything, meaning any variable that's updated by an event, can actually be represented as a set of values over time, even events. And this, again, is one of the biggest hurdles, right? This whole idea that everything can be represented as a set of values over time, even events. So let's go ahead and dissect that a little bit. If we look at the definition of a set, it's set in the math sense. And again, current mindset when you're typically doing development is when one action happens, you get one value back. But the new mindset should be just treat events as sets of values. An example set could be a null set, a set of 0, or just a normal set that we typically think about as well. So if everything is a set of values, you can do so much more with your data, right? You can query it, you can map it, you can filter it, you can join and combine it in different ways. You can give something half a set of things or things with a set of parameters, and a lot of possibilities within your application actually open up. So hopefully that helps you, digest a little bit, hey, how do I actually think reactively? But now let's talk about reactive programming with the amazing abstraction called RxJS. So there's a lot of definitions about RxJS, but if I had to put it in, clearer terms, I would say, number one, it's actually just a language on top of JavaScript. So I love that because it's a domain-specific language that actually is for reacting to events. So when you learn RxJS, the knowledge of RxJS actually stays with you forever. It's almost like framework agnostic. So you can take that knowledge, and it doesn't matter what technology you use. A lot of the code is just copy-paste of your RxJS code. So a lot of times when people are doing migrations, like for example in React, when they're doing migrations, let's say from AngularJS to React, they'll shove everything in RxJS, or they'll shove everything in Redux observable first, and then try to figure out how to do everything. So this is also the most popular reactive programming library. So it has over 20 million downloads per month on NPM between RxJS 4 and 5, which is so awesome. So if so many people are using it, we should be using it too. But again, in Angular, we're forced to use it. So there's also other dialects. So as I've been doing trainings with Rx Workshop, I've seen this actually, that people who come from the Ruby background or the .NET background or whatever, if they've used something like Rx Swift or Rx Java, Rx PHP, using RxJS just feels so familiar. There's a common language. This also helps a lot when you work with back-end development teams. So if you're using, if you have a .NET background and your back-end and your team is using Rx.NET, then when they look at the RxJS code, they can kind of figure out exactly what's happening. So I really like the idea that it helps cross-collaboration between the front-end and the back-end teams. So when we think about RxJS, there's actually 3 different parts to RxJS. So you have observables, you have observers, and then you have operators. So let's talk about what an observable is, and then how observers actually work with those observables. So this is the, actually when I say this, people say, what? So basically, observables are basically just functions in JavaScript, right? They don't do anything, just like functions don't do anything until you call them, observables don't do anything until you actually subscribe to them. So if we think about observables as just functions, then we can actually have an imaginary observable here, represented as a function called myObservable. And the way we call our imaginary observable is just by passing in an observer object with callback handlers on it. And then the next method is going to be called when an observable wants to emit values. And the error method is called when there is problem or there's an error condition. And when an observable is done emitting values, the way it signals it's done emitting is just by calling complete. So since our imaginary observable is just a function, if we want to use it at all we have to do is call it with an observer object. And it could also just return a teardown function to clean itself up. So the question usually is, okay, well, if observables are just functions, why not just use functions? Well, it's awesome because something like RxJS actually handles all of the stuff, some stuff that functions can't actually handle for you. So this really helps improve the developer experience and just makes your life a lot easier. So for example, with functions, you might accidentally call methods out of order. So you'd never want to call a next after a complete, of course, and observables will actually protect you from things like this. Now, if you're just using functions as well, you're always going to have to check if there's a teardown returned or not. And you always have to provide the next error and complete because the function expects them, right? So in this case, the function is actually going to error out because we haven't provided the complete method and it's expecting it. And you always have to call the teardown function on error and complete. So that's a lot. It's a lot to remember when you're coding. But what you could do is you could basically just take this function, right? And you can actually wrap it in a class that handles it for you. So here all we're doing, this might look familiar to folks, we're just wrapping it in an observable constructor, which is the most basic way to create an observable. And the observable class is going to normalize all that behavior for you automatically. So it's going to make sure that the observer you get always has a next error and complete. And it's also going to make sure that when you call error and complete, that it calls any teardown function that you provided as well, instead of having to, again, call it directly and do all that. So now what you could do after you've wrapped the function in an observable constructor is just call subscribe, and then the observer will give you the method's next error and complete to emit the values. So here you can see I'm calling next to emit the values. But the cool thing is, even though I'm not really providing error complete, right, the observer is going to automatically provide that for me anyways. So I get less typing, more guarantees, and development is way more awesome. The other great thing about observables is that when you call unsubscribe, it actually tears down everything for you and handles cleaning up any memory management. And that's kind of an unsexy thing to talk about, memory management, but is so awesome, and it's a really great benefit of using RxJS. So this is kind of just to illustrate this whole idea, again, that just observables are just like functions, right? But again, they come with a lot of really cool guarantees that just make your development life a lot easier. So that's an idea of what an observable is and how observers work. And the next question a lot of people have when they look at RxJS is, what is an operator, right? Again, in Angular, we use it and we have operators. But if you look at, if anybody asks you what is an operator, it just helps you transform one observable into another. So we're already familiar with methods like filter and map we use on arrays in JavaScript. And this is very similar to what operators are in RxJS. And here is, I hope you guys have used the map and filter operator in your code. But here all I'm doing is I'm creating an observable of numbers, and then I'm using the map and filter operators and subscribing to the observable with the observer. And then I'm just emitting the values from that observable and logging it out to the console. So operators are really cool, and it's super awesome that RxJS just does all of it for you. But if you want to look at the actual code, and you want to kind of like look under the hood and see how the map operator is actually implemented if you were to create it for yourself. You can see that all we're doing here is we're simply taking an observable and returning a new observable. And then we're subscribing to it instead of calling it like we would a function. And then we're passing along the transformed value and emitting the value by calling observer.next. And then, of course, again, with observers, you automatically get the methods error and complete if you need them. So when you are thinking that you need a new operator in RxJS, you are probably wrong, because there's over 60 operators in RxJS, and you probably will not need to implement one on your own. These are a few favorites. So I really like take until, for example. But check them out if you haven't used them. The documentation is improving, or you can always reach out to me as well. So we talked a little bit about RxJS, but now let's talk about actually how reactive programming can make your development life a lot easier, because that's very important. So with RxJS, you actually can do a lot of really cool things with a lot less code, and this is what I love. This is also why I love Angular, because I have to write less code versus React. So drag and drop, for example, right? It's a hard problem. I know the, was it the Elements team? So anyways, the Angular team in general just really something that made drag and drop really easy. But if you wanted to do it in RxJS, you could as well. And so here you see I have a Grumpy Cat game. Here's my little Grumpy Cat. And I'm able to drag and drop super easily and feed Grumpy Cat. And then, you know, if I feed Grumpy Cat the good things or the bad things, I win or the cat wins. So very basic, just to, again, illustrate what you can do, what drag and drop looks like, or the code I'm about to show you anyways. So here, I'm just going to walk you through the code and how I implemented this drag and drop in RxJS and Angular. So all I did was do my normal imports from Angular, and then I'm just importing a few things from RxJS, like from event and subscription, and then I'm importing the operators I need to use, like filter, merge, map, tap, take until, and map. And then I'm not going to go into full detail about what each one of these operators do, because we'll be short on time. But again, just wanted to illustrate that it's just so easy to do something when you know RxJS and use it. So here again, I'm just doing a little bit of setup. I'm creating some new subjects that I'll be using in my code, a mouse down, mouse move, and a mouse up. And then I'm just defining subscription that which we'll use later. Then I'm creating a target mouse down, and I'm filtering it based on any element with the food symbol on it. The emoji doesn't show up in Google Slides for some reason. So then I'm just saying, okay, for any of those targeted mouse downs, right, with the food emoji, I'm creating another observable of mouse drags to make the element draggable. And finally, I'm making that element draggable until there is a mouse up event by using the take until operator. So you can see take until this dot mouse ups. And then I'm creating a new subscription when the component initializes and subscribing to the mouse drag observable. So when I'm dragging, I'm actually changing the style so that it actually drags on the screen. And then when the component goes ahead and unmounts, I'm making sure to clean up my subscription by unsubscribing. And some of y'all might say, couldn't this be more Angular-like? And yeah, it could be, and we thought about that. But it's more efficient to just update the DOM directly in this case. So here's my HTML in case you're curious. And again, it's just, you know, a bunch of the food emojis, and those are supposed to be the little plate emojis as well. So anything that's draggable on the screen is only the thing that has the food emoji on it. So I'll show you again what that looks like. See, as I click on the hot dog, it's draggable, and then it stops after the mouse up. And yeah, it's cute. So that was cute. At least I thought it was cute. But we could also do more complex things, for example, like multiplexing over a WebSocket using RxJS. And because my friends and everybody I hang out with is so RxJS heavy, when I said I wanted to show people how to multiplex over a WebSocket, you know, they finally said, Tracy, you know, nobody knows what that means, right? I said, really? I thought everybody knew what it means. But let's talk about what actually multiplexing over a WebSocket is. So multiplexing in our case is when you're sending and receiving multiple independent requests and responses concurrently over the same WebSocket. So why would you need to multiplex? That's a good question. Well, multiplexing is actually going to help reduce the amount of overhead of opening multiple WebSockets over, you know, and when you're doing things like receiving real-time updates between the client and the server, right? Or if you want to do something like continuous streaming, this is very popular. So at Netflix, they do a lot of this. So here you will see I have this app. I love this app. And I can click a button, right? And it sends a request to my WebSocket server. So each one of these heads, if you don't know Ken Wheeler, follow him on Twitter, you'll have fun. For some reason, he represents America these days in the tech world, good or bad. But each one of Ken's head represents an individual request from the server, and every little shake you see of Ken's head also represents a new value being pushed from me from the server over one WebSocket connection, which is pretty cool in my opinion. So as you can see, there are a lot of requests being multiplexed between the client and the server, again, over one WebSocket connection. And by the way, Ken's head only appears for a short bit of time because in my code, I've just used the timer observable and set it to 3 seconds so that when the observable completes, it unsubscribes from itself. So this example, by the way, is not done in Angular. It's actually done in React Native because I want to show you how flexible RxJS is. Okay, let's move on to the next. How do we do this? There we go. All right, so I'm going to show you what that looks like. I'll walk through my code and talk to you a little bit about this. So here I'm doing in my React application, I'm just doing all my imports I need to do again, and then I'm importing WebSocket from RxJS. And WebSocket is just the WebSocket API, and it's wrapped in a subject. And all it does is just provide conveniences around the WebSocket. So what we're doing here is we're creating an initial state of random Kens, which is just an object that we're going to treat as a dictionary to look up random Ken heads by ID. And then we make a WebSocket subject, which is lazy, so it's not actually going to create the WebSocket in the browser until we actually subscribe to it. And then we have a request Ken head function here, and every time we call it, it's going to send a message through to the server through that WebSocket to request a Ken head, and then we're going to use that later when we click a button to request the Ken head. Now over here, so when the component mounts, that's when we're actually going to set up our WebSocket to listen to the responses. And we know the server is going to send us Ken heads by ID. So whenever we request a Ken head, we're going to get a unique ID back for that particular request. The server is actually going to continuously give us a stream of Ken heads by ID with animation coordinates for that particular Ken head. So we want to go ahead and group those. So you see I'm using the group by operator there so that we have individual streams for each Ken head we request, and then what happens is when we request a Ken head, we're going to go ahead and get a new stream for each particular Ken head. And that stream of, oh, my cursor, and that stream of animation coordinates will actually animate each head for about 3 seconds. And you can see I'm using the timer operator there for that. Okay, and then what we want to do is we want to go ahead and clean up and remove that Ken head after 3 seconds, and we can just do that using the finalize operator. So this again is showing you how many operators you can use and when you actually understand what on earth is going on. And now we have an actual stream of Ken heads, right? And so we can actually subscribe to it, and at this point when we subscribe, it's actually going to kick off the WebSocket. And every time we get a response back, we're going to update our dictionary by setting state. And if the component unmounts, then we want to make sure we tear down the WebSocket as well by just calling unsubscribe. Okay, so now we have a, sorry, it's not so big. Now that we have a map of random Kens and we want to get all the values from that, so we're going to use the object of values, which will give us back an array of those Ken values. And now that we have an array of Ken heads, we can basically loop over that, and for each Ken head, we create an image for him based on the X and Y coordinates that we receive from the server. So every time we re-render, we could actually be adding a new image, or we could be updating an existing image that was already there. And of course, on the button, you see the button and the on press at the bottom, that's where we're using our request Ken head function that I showed you earlier to actually request the Ken head. So hopefully that was fun. This code is all on GitHub, so you can look at it later. But we talked about reactive programming in different standards, of course. And then we talked about reactive programming in different frameworks and libraries. So I hope when you guys go and look at your code, you'll start seeing these sort of patterns everywhere. We also talked about how to think reactively. Hopefully that helped a little bit if you're having some problems with RxJS code. And what RxJS is, and then how reactive programming actually makes your development life a lot easier. So one thing, I did use a lot of operators in that second example, but don't get stressed out about it. Basically, if you're going to use RxJS, you don't need to Rx all the things. So all you can do is just dip your toe in a little bit, and you can do things like use it on a click handler for AJAX requests because it allows for very easy cancellation. Anything asynchronous if you like as well. Or you can just call subscribe and do your normal imperative code. And I think a lot of people do that in the Angular community right now. So don't stress out about that. I lead the Docs initiative with Jan Nicholas as well. And we want contributors. So if you're looking for a very easy way to get involved in the open source community and make your first commit, feel free to just, you know, come hang out, look at the issues, see what's going on there, and just come contribute. I'm trying to get them right now to push the RxJS docs to be multilingual. So we already have it translated in Russian. It's sitting in a Google Doc. But we would also like to translate it in Chinese as well. So whether you want to help us finagle how that works technically in the code and have those conversations, there's an issue open for that. Or whether you just want to help with some random translations, that is totally awesome as well. I'm on Twitter at LadyLeet. If you are not on Twitter and you don't use Twitter yet, I highly recommend it because all the people you see writing technologies are on Twitter, and you can just ask them questions on Twitter. So if you have an RxJS bug, you can ask me, you can ask Ben Lesh. We're hanging out. We love to talk to people. If you want to look at the Grumpy Cat game on Twitter with the drag and drop, you can look it on GitHub. And then I have the React Native bobblehead app as well. And then, you know, one thing that Ben and I created very late at night one day was the Node WebSocket server for the React Native example. So you can check that out as well. So thank